Okay, so good afternoon again. So this is Microeconomics 2 class. I'm Dr. Abdul Haq Sinachki. I will be your course coordinator and your tutor at the same time. My consultation hour will be on Wednesday from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. and Thursday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And you can email me at abdulhaq@utah.edu.my if you have any question. Also, you can reach me via Microsoft Teams anytime. And if you have any urgent matters, you still also can text me or WhatsApp me. I have provided my phone number in e-ribbon. So we start with first topic. We'll do it in 2 lecture classes. So we are going to talk about perfect competition factor markets. I believe that you have learned in previous course, which is Microeconomics 1, about the output market, where the market for goods and services that the firm sell and consumer purchase. By now, I think it is time to go for another topic, which is factor markets. Means that markets for labor, for raw materials, and other input for production for the production. So those materials will be very familiar to us because the same forces that shape the supply and demand in the output market that you have learned previously also will affect the factor markets. So also we have learned in Microeconomics 1 that some output markets are perfectly or almost perfectly competitive, but also there is others producers. They have a market power like monopoly or oligopoly. The same also is true for the factor markets, where we need to examine the competitive factor market, equilibrium in the competitive market, and analyze also the perfect competition factor market. So, what is a competitive factor market? A competitive factor market is one in which there are a large number of sellers and buyers. A large number of sellers and buyers. For a factor production such as labor or raw materials, usually we use labor as L and other materials also K as machines or capital. So when buying and selling these inputs or materials in a competitive market, we will have the equilibrium also. So first thing that we need to remember in a competitive factor market that we have a large number of sellers and a large number of buyers. So because now single seller or buyer can affect the price of a given factor or input. If you still remember in a competitive market of the output, we say the price is determined by the interaction of supply and demand. And because of the homogeneity or the identical product in the market, there is no company can have influence on that price. So the price is determined by the supply and demand forces. And same thing here, because there is no single seller or buyer can affect the price of a given factor. Each is a price taker, means that each firm of those large number of buyers is a price taker, and the same for the sellers. Then we see how the market determines the price of that product and they sell it or buy it. For example, if let's say you have a company that you are in construction, for example, in Kampala here, and you can see there is so many buildings. In order to construct houses, you need to buy cement, you need to buy brick. That kind of goods are identical. Brick is brick. Yes, you may find some differences, but like a cement, so or like a brick, when you buy it from the market, is depend on that how much the price of the market. So if your firm that buy this brick to construct homes in Kampala, when you purchase a small share of the total volume of the brick available in Malaysia, so your purchasing decision will not affect on the price. You want to cancel the purchase or you want to add more purchase, actually that will not affect the price, because it will be a very marginal compared with so many large number of buyers and also a large number of sellers. At the same time, for the supplier, if each supplier of those bricks that you use in construction control only a small share of the market, because there is so many a large number of sellers, so no individual supplier or company decision will affect the price of the brick. So you can see here, the price of that brick actually will be determined by the aggregate supply and the aggregate demand for the bricks. And when we have that interaction, there will be the price. So we go to the demand for factors input when only one input is variable. And this is when we say one input variable, that means, if you remember, we are talking about short run, right? We are talking about mostly on labor. So here also, like demand curve for the final goods that result from the production process. Also, the demand curve for factors of production or input are downward sloping. So you can see the slope of the demand downward sloping for the output. It is the same for the input. Remember, now we are talking about the input. We are talking about factor of production, labor, capital, other inputs, raw materials. Rather than we are talking about the product itself, like previous one, we talk about output. Computers, purchase the computers, purchase door, purchase a chair. Now we are talking about the input or the factors that we use to produce that output. So as I said, the demand curve for the factor of production also is downward sloping. But unlike consumers' demand for goods and services, however, the factor demands are derived demand, means that they depend on and are derived from the firm level of output and the cost of input. I give you an example. The demand for Microsoft Corporation for computer programmers, when we need a computer program, that one is derived from the demand that depends not only on the current salaries of the programmers, how much we have to pay those programmers, but also on how much software Microsoft expects to sell. So if Microsoft expects to sell a huge amount of those computers, or sorry, those softwares, then the demand for those programs will be higher. If Microsoft expects to sell very less quantity of software, then the demand for those computer programs will be less. So it is not only about how much their salaries, but also how much we are going to produce. Then we have here the factor input demand also when we have only one variable input, which is labor most of the time. So we assume that the firm produce output using two inputs, which is capital K and labor L. So this company can hire at the price of R, or the rental cost of capital, R, we call it the rental rate of capital, and also it will hire at the price of W, which is the wage rate or the salary, how much it would cost us that labor. So the capital is fixed in the short run analysis, as I say, because usually capital, for example, one of the capital, for example, building a plant for production. That one you cannot just change it within 1 or 2 days or 1 month. You need at least 3 years to 5 years to build and install all those machines. So this capital. But labor, you can hire tomorrow another 20 new staff or fire them within 1 day or 2 days or 1 month. So the firm must decide now how much labor to hire. Since now you have the capital is fixed and only the labor is variable. This input. One variable is input. You can change only this. So now you come to that decision. How much labor you should hire? When you ask that question, why you ask that question? Because you ask this question, you are saying how much labor I should hire to maximize my profit. When you do a business, the first thing is to maximize the profit. If not about profit maximization, then you can hire 100 labor, 200 labor, it doesn't matter. But maximizing the profit, because when the firm has a profit, the value of the firm will increase. The value of the firm actually is correlated to the profit of the firm. Then we go to this now question. How does the firm decide if it's profitable to hire another worker or no? If now we have only 5 workers, should we go for the 6th worker and the 7th and the 8th or no? How much actually these need to be? So we suppose that the firm has hired a certain number of workers, let's say 10, and want to know whether it is profitable to hire an additional 1, let's say 11. Now I have 10. I want to see if I add another 1, 11, is that make profit or no? So we can say this will be profitable if the additional revenue from the output of the worker labor is greater than its cost. Means that an additional revenue that this company or myself I generate by employing this labor should exceed its cost. If I hire this labor $20 per day, he should at least bring for me revenue, an additional revenue of 21, for example. Then I can see that, or I can say that it is profitable. If I hire this labor with $20 or 20 ringgit per day, but he generates an additional revenue of only 19, that means it's not profitable. So the additional revenue from an incremental unit of labor, or we call it, remember that word very well, the marginal revenue product of labor, or MRPL, marginal revenue product of labor. Then later also we talk about the marginal revenue product of K, which is capital, which is the same, concept. Then the incremental cost of a unit of labor is the wage, as I said, how much you hire it, and the profitable to hire more labor if the marginal revenue product of labor is at least as large as the wage rate. Means that this RPL at least equal to W or greater than W. So in order to know, so we need now to measure the MRPL or the marginal revenue product of labor. So MRPL is an additional, as I say, of output obtained from additional unit of labor multiplied by the additional revenue from an extra unit of output. Means that MRPL is an additional output obtained from an additional unit of labor multiplied by an additional revenue from the extra of unit output. And this additional output is given by marginal productivity. So this additional output obtained from the additional unit of labor, we call it the marginal productivity. How we calculate the marginal productivity, we will see it in the next slide. Actually, you will know it, right? I'm sure that. And the additional revenue that we gain from that extra unit of output is the marginal revenue, MR. This additional revenue, or we call it the marginal revenue. So let's see that. As I say, the marginal revenue product is changes of revenue divided by changes of labor. Okay. R is revenue, L is labor. And the marginal product or the additional output per unit labor, MPL, equal to changes of quantity divided by changes of labor, or we call it Q2 minus Q1 divided by L2 minus L1, or the definition of Q divided by definition of L in mathematics. And the marginal revenue equal to changes of R, or changes of revenue divided by changes of quantities, or we call it R2 minus R1 divided by Q2 minus Q1. So here, if you can see now, if I put here changes of R divided by changes of L, if I multiply this, if I multiply changes Q divided by changes of L times changes of R divided changes of Q. So changes of Q with changes will go. Then we will have changes of R divided by changes of L, which is this. Correct? So means that RPL, I can write it as changes of R divided by changes of Q, which is MR, times changes of Q divided of changes of L, which is MPL. So we will have first condition, which is MRPL equal to MPL times marginal revenue. So this is the first condition that you need to know in order to maximize your profit. Then in competitive market also, if you still remember, I previously studied that in competitive market, we usually the firm produce where the marginal revenue equal to the price. Why? The important result of any competitive factor market, whether or not the output market is competitive. But to examine the characteristics of MRPL, so let's assume that, or we start with the case of perfect competitive output, which is you studied previously a perfect competitive input. Now we talk about perfect competitive output. So in a competitive output market, the firm will sell all its output at a market price of P. Because we say at the competitive market, the firm is a price taker, not the firm cannot decide how much the price want to sell. If you are producing bricks, this is identical. You cannot say, oh, my brick is 20 ringgit, which is the same quality of another company bricks, selling only 10. If you want to just say 11 ringgit, only 1 ringgit extra, no one will buy from you. So you have to follow the market price. So therefore, as we say that in a competitive market or output market, the firm will sell all its output at a market price as P. So here, therefore, the marginal revenue from the selling of an additional unit of output is then equal to P here. So MR equal to P. In this case, the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the marginal product of labor times the price of product. So we will say marginal revenue product of labor, MRPL, equal to the marginal product of labor times the price. So in graphically, we can we see these diminishing marginal returns or MPL falls as labor increase, and we can see in this graph. So we have here the higher of the two curves in this figure, okay, represent this, the MRPL curve for a firm in a competitive output market. So this is a competitive output market. And note that because there is a diminishing market return to labor, diminishing market return to labor means that when hour of work or labor increase, the wages will decrease, diminishing. Changes of here will be diminishing when we shift from 1 point to 1 point, 1 point to 1 point. So here the marginal product of labor, the marginal product of labor MP will also increase. So the marginal revenue product curve thus slope downward even though the price of output is constant. Why the price of output is constant? Because as we say, we are in a competitive market, and in a competitive market, the companies are price taker, not those companies can decide how much. So even the price is stagnant, we can see the marginal revenue here also can the marginal revenue product curve, this MRP is slope downward like that. So the more you hire labor, that marginal revenue product you keep decreasing until you reach a situation where it is zero or maybe negative, And when you reach a situation where you add one more labor, you will lose money rather than you make money, and we will see that later. So now if we see in the lower part here a monopolistic open market, actually in the monopolistic open market, here the firm has a monopoly power, means that the price will be determined by the firm but not by the market forces. So in that kind of market, you learn also in the previous course, Microeconomics 1, that P is greater than MR. Actually, this company will sell at price greater than the marginal revenue and will make more profit. So the lower curve in the figure here is where the MRPL curve, when the firm has monopoly power in the output market. When the firm have a monopoly market, they face also a downward sloping demand curve and must therefore lower the price of all units in product in order to sell more. So it doesn't mean that they have monopoly power, they can set the price until up here. It can put here, but it will say less. If put here, it sell more. The more reduce the price, the lower price providing, the more also quantities will sell. So as a result here, the marginal revenue also is always less than the price. So marginal revenue always less than the price, or the price of selling that good always greater than the marginal revenue. So this explains why the monopolistic curve lies below the competitive curve and why the marginal revenue falls as output increase. So always, when you compare the competitive output market with the monopolistic output market, the curve or this MRPL of the monopolistic market comes down, and the curve MRPL curve of competitive output market comes up. So thus, the marginal revenue product curve slopes downward in this case, because the marginal revenue and the marginal product curve slope downward. So you can see also a downward. So this is how it explained. You can see both of them have the same logic. Now choosing the profit maximizing amount of labor. So we know that the marginal revenue product tells us actually how much the firm should be willing to pay to hire an additional unit of labor. If a firm wants to increase its labor in order to increase the production, how much that firm is willing to pay the salary or the wage, W. As long as the marginal revenue product of labor is greater than the wage rate, if this MRPL is greater than W, then the firm should hire more labor. Why? Because the marginal cost of hiring the worker is less than the marginal revenue that this company is getting from hiring that worker. So it means that making a profit. If the marginal revenue product is less than the wage rate, means that MRPL is less than W. So in that case, it should hire less labor until we reach that scenario, MRPL greater than W. So here the firm should lay off worker, reducing worker, keep reducing until we reach that. But only when the marginal revenue product is equal to the wage rate will the firm have hired the profit maximizing amount of labor, or we call it the profit maximizing condition, where we have MRPL equal to W. So actually, the firm, they try their best to hire until the wage of hiring one additional labor is equal of the marginal revenue product of that particular labor producing, or an additional revenue generated from that additional unit of labor. So 1 MRPL equal to W, there we can say that we reach to the profit maximizing amount of labor. So here we have in this graph, it shows us when we are going to hire by a firm in the labor market. So this figure, for example, illustrates the condition where we have MRPL equal to W. The demand for labor curve, we call it DL, actually is the marginal revenue product for labor. So we can see that the quantity of labor demanded increases the wage rate. You know, this price of labor, when the companies need more workers, so the demand for workers increase, automatically the price of labor will increase, therefore the wage will increase. If companies lay off workers, means that the demand for labor is decreasing, we don't need so much labor, then the price of labor or the wage for labor will decrease. So because the labor market is perfectly competitive in that case, the firm can hire as many workers as it wants at the market wage W, or we call it W equilibrium or W star, because the firm is in competitive market. So the wage of those labor is determined by the supply and demand of labor. So the company can hire as much as can and pay the wages of W star, and is not able to affect the market wage, because as we say, the wage is determined by the supply and demand forces. So that company hire less or more labor, it will not affect the labor market wage. The supply of labor curve facing the firm SL, this is thus horizontal line, and the profit maximizing amount of labor that the firm hires, well, we call it L star, should be here. Sorry, should be here. Here is not appeared. Should be here where I'm showing the mouse. L star with W star, interaction of MRPL with this supply L, or SL with the demand L. Here we will decide how much this W star, which is here, and labor star. So you can see the profit maximizing firm will hire a star unit of labor at the point where the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to the wage rate, this interaction. Wage equal to MRPN, and here we decide the labor. Okay. So this is we already explained just now. Then we have this graph now, a shift in the supply of labor. When there is a shift in the supply of labor, suddenly we have so many labors or workers. Could be increased or could be decreased. Okay. So in this scenario, in this figure, shows that how the quantity of labor demanded changes in response to a drop in the market rate from W1 to W2. So in W1 it was here, W2 it was here, shifted from S1 to S2. The wage rate may decrease if more people entering the labor force are looking for job for the first time. Okay? Baby boomers, for example, a new graduate student, when you enter the job market, this is what we do. What you will do, you will track this W2 from W1 to W2 because it will be our supply. The quantity of labor demanded by the firm is initially, it was at LL1. We have the first scenario, we say when S1 interact DL or MRPL, we have here L1, that what the firm's hire, and the wage is W1. So what happened now? However, when the supply of labor curve shift from S1 to S2, you can see that equilibrium also shift from L1 to L2. So the wage fall from W1 to W2, and the quantity of labor demanded increase from L1 to L2, because you as a firm, now you can hire people with cheaper price or less salaries, therefore you can hire more workers in order to do the job. So you can see here, when the wages decrease, this lead the quantity demanded of labor also increase. Now we see thus factor import demand in a calculation or comparing input and output market. So factor markets are similar to output markets in many ways. For example, the factor market profit maximizing condition that the marginal revenue product of labor MRPL, which is equal to the wage rate or W, is analogous to the output market condition that we learned that the marginal revenue MR equal to the marginal cost, which is MC. In the, we say, previous course or Microeconomics 1, we learned that firms would produce when it has MR equal to MC or marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost to maximize the profit. And here when we talk about the output, the input, sorry, or the factor, we are saying that the marginal revenue MR of product labor is equal to the wage, or that wage rate is the cost actually, or marginal cost. So in order to see why this is true, we can recall that we say MRPL equal to, or the marginal revenue product of labor equal to the marginal product of labor times the marginal revenue. All right? We say that one. And this here we have the profit maximizing number of workers. So if you can see that we divide both this MRPL equal to W. See here, MRPL, we say it is equal to MPL times MR, correct? So in order to maximize the profit, we have to reach this MRPL equal to W. Just now we see it. So this is can be MRPL can be written MPL times MR and equal W. If we divide both sides by MPL, so we will have MPL times MR divided by MPL equal to W divided by MPL. So here MPL with MPL will go, we will have MR equal to W divided by MPL. And we say that MR equal to the MC, so W divided by MPL equal to the marginal cost of production. So because the marginal product of labor measures the additional output per unit of input, the right hand side of the equation, this is right, measure the right side, MC here, measures the marginal cost of an additional unit of output. In that case, the wage rate multiplied by the labor needed to produce 1 unit of output. So we can say now W or rate, the wage rate divided by marginal product of labor equal to the marginal cost. So this is another equation that we need to. So from that equation, just now we showed that both the hiring and the output choices of the firm should follow the same rule. Where first one, input or output are chosen so that the marginal revenue from the sale of output is equal to the marginal cost from the purchase of input. So in this principle hold in both competitive and a non-competitive market. So here we talk now when factor input demand when we have many inputs. So in choosing more than one variable input, a change in the price of one input changes the demand for the others. So for example, when a firm simultaneously chooses quantities or 2 or more variables input, the hiring problem becomes, in this case, more complex and more difficult. Why? Because a change in the price of one input will change the demand for another. And in here we can have an example. For example, both labor, for example, and assembly line machinery, maybe assembly line machinery of a car, and you have a labor, are variable input for producing, for example, a car. Let's say that we wish to determine how much the firm demand for labor curve. In that case, we have labor, we have an assembly line machinery for a car or for other machine. So as the wage rate falls, here, when the wage rate falls, salaries, more labor will be demanded even if the firm's investment in machinery is unchanged, because now you will have to pay less salaries to workers. Then you need firms, what they do, they will hire more workers because the wages are less. Even though that the equipment that they use are same. But as labor becomes less expensive, the marginal cost of producing this car will fall, because labor is one of the input or the cost. Since the wages reduce, then the marginal cost will reduce. Consequently, it is profitable for the firm to increase its output, since the input reduce, the cost of those inputs reduce for, so the firm here want to increase the output, that means producing more. In that case, the firm is likely to invest in additional machinery to expand the production capacity, because if you want to hire another 20 workers, they need more machines to work on them. So the firm will invest more in those machinery and expand the capacity of production. So when the firm expanding the use of machinery, this causes the marginal revenue product of labor curve also to shift to the right, and this in turn the quantity of labor demanded will increase, and we can see that here in this graph, right? So suppose that when the wage is $20 here, the wage is $20 at A here, right? At this $20, how much the firm here hire? It hire here 80, around 100. So here 100 hours of work. And here we can see at point A on the MRPL 1 curve. This is MRPL 1 curve. So now consider that suddenly the wage rate fall to only $15, from 20 fall down to 15. So because the marginal revenue product of labor is now greater than the wage, you can see the firm will demand more labor because the cost of producing that product reduced. So the marginal also revenue, the marginal revenue product for labor now is greater, much greater than W. So the firm will hire more and more workers. So now when the firm demand more labor, and the MRPL curve describes the demand for labor when the use of machinery is fixed here. Okay, this is, we assume that the machinery in this case is fixed because it's not expanding yet. But once the wage decrease, this company will hire more labor. In fact, a greater amount of labor causes the marginal product of capital also to rise, which encourage the firm to rent more machinery as well as hire more labor. So in order to hire more labor, they need more machinery, so this firm will expand that investment and will buy more machinery, and the marginal revenue product of capital of this machinery will also rise. So because there is more machinery, the marginal product of labor also will increase. Because there is more machinery, then you can put, let's say, one labor only in one machinery instead of 2 in 1. So the productivity or the marginal revenue of product of that labor also will increase. With more machinery, workers can be more productive. So the marginal revenue product curve will therefore shift to this MRPL 2 from here to here. The discontinued line, the blue one. Thus, when the wage rate falls from 20 to 15, the firm will use, in that case, in this interaction, almost 140 hours of labor. And this is shown by the new point of the demand curve C here. Rather than, it is not 120 here in the point of B. Why? Because A and C are both on the firm demand of labor curve, which machinery variable, what we call it, the DL, right? But this is machinery available, but here in B is not. So the firm will adjust the number of new labors with the new number of machineries, and it will be here at point C. So you can see now a decrease in wages lead to a labor to increase from 100 to 140, and therefore also the marginal revenue product also increased, and the curve of marginal revenue product shifted to the right or increasing from MRPL1 to MRPL2. So now talk about the market demand curve. So all firms' demand for labor vary substantially. Then we assume that all firms respond to a lower wage. Means that all firms would hire more workers. When we have a lower wage, all firms will hire more workers. The market supply would increase and the market price will fall because there is more supply than the price will fall, and the quantity demanded for labor automatically by the firms will be smaller. So how we see that? So when here we aggregated the individual demand curves of consumers, for example, to obtain the market demand curve for any product. So usually we concern about with a single industry only. But however, a factor input such as skilled labor, for example, is demanded by firms in many different industries. But as we move from industry to industry, we are likely to find that the firm demand for labor, which are derived in part from the demand for firms' output, for example, vary substantially. Therefore, to obtain the total market demand for labor curve, we must first determine each industry demand for labor, and then we add all those industry demand curve horizontally, one by one. And this is what we have done when in the import, when we done the supply and demand for import also for each industry. So the second step is straightforward. Adding industry demand curve for labor to obtain a market demand curve for labor is just like adding an individual product demand curve to obtain the market demand curve for that product, as I say what we have done previously. So now we concentrate on our attention on the more difficult part, which is the first step. So we look at this graph to explain that one. So as I say, when determining the industry demand, the first step is to determine the industry demand. We take into account the fact that both level of output produced by the firm and its product price change as the price of the input to production also change. When the price change and the input of production also change, then the price of that particular output also will be changed. So it is easiest to determine the market demand when there is a single producer. Of course, there is only one producer, we take a step forward. But in that case, the marginal revenue product, or MRP, curve is the industry demand curve for the input. And when there are many firms, however, the analysis is more complex because of the possible interaction among the firms. So we consider, for instance, that the demand for labor when output market are perfectly competitive. So to make it easier, we assume that we are in a perfect competitive. We can see here we have a firm or we have the industry. So we will see how this will apply, the firm level will apply to the industry level. So the marginal revenue product of labor is the product of the price of the good and the marginal product of labor as shown by the curve, just previous one, MRPL. Okay, I see in the left here in the frame, MRPL 1. This is, is the marginal product of labor. So now we suppose that the wage rate of labor is $15 per hour, and that this is 15, and that the firm demands how much? 100 workers' hours of labor. Now we assume that the wage rate of this firm falls from 15 to $10 per hour only. If no other firms could hire workers, we assume there is no other firms hire workers at that lower wage, then this firm, or we call it our firm, this firm, would hire 150 workers, all of them until here, of labor, by finding the point where MRPL1 curve that correspond on that $10. I'm assuming that other firms are not hiring more labor. Only our firm that hiring additional labor because of that drop in the wages. So in that case, but if the wage rate falls for all firms, not only our firm, all firms in the industry as a whole will hire more labor, and this lead to more output from the industry, a shift to the right of the industry supply curve, and a lower market price in the product. So we can see now in the industry, in the left side, when the product price falls from the marginal revenue product curve also shift downward here and goes to from MRPL1 to MRPL2. So this shift results in a lower quantity of labor demanded. You can see, instead of 150, it's only 120 by our firm. Because remember, it's not only our firm are hiring, but also there is ours. So consequently, industry demand for labor will be lower than it would be if only one firm were able to hire workers at lower wage. For example, in this figure, in the right side, we can see that. So the darker line, the blue here, shows the horizontal sum of the individual firm demand for labor that would result if a product price did not change as wage falls. So the line shows that, another line here shows that industry demand curve for labor, which take into account the lighter one, DL2, take into account the fact that product price will fall as all firms expand their output in response to the lower wage rate. Because the logic behind that, if our firm expand the output, because hire more labor, expand the output, we will have more supply. Another firm, when you add up all these, we will have more supply, and therefore we assume that here the price or the product price also will fall. So when the wage rate is 15 per hour, the industry demand for labor is L0. When it was, the wage is 15 here, the labor, it was L0 for the industry, yeah? Not for the firm, huh? For the firm was 100. Now, L0, I don't know, maybe 1,000, 2,000. When it falls to $10, then the industry demand increased to L1. Here, the interaction with the L2, right? But note that this is a smaller increase than L2. Suppose to go to this, one horizontal sum of product price and change. But that one is illogic. The price, it must change. Why it must change? Because every firm will increase the output, and therefore the what we say, the demand for that product will be DL2 rather than DL1. So that when the price change to 10, we will have the interaction with here, and we have L1 but not L2. So note that this is a smaller increase than L2, which would occur if the product price were fixed, which is impossible. The aggregation of an industry demand curve into the market demand curve of labor is the final step, and to complete it, we simply add the labor demanded in all industries. So I can also add here that the derivation of the market demand curve for labor or for any other input is essentially the same when the output market is non-competitive. The only difference is that it is more difficult to predict the change in product price in response to the change in the wage rate, because each firm in the market is likely to be pricing strategically rather than taking price as a given. Means that this scenario can be applied the same in other market structure rather than competitive market, let's say oligopoly or monopoly. But the problem is that we will find some difficulties in adding up, or predicting the change in the product price in response to the change in the wage rate, because each firm has its own price, or because those firms are not price taker but price maker. They make the price because their product in oligopoly or monopoly, the product is not identical. So it will be the same scenario but in a different, what we say, in a different or a difficult way to measure it. I think it's already 6. I come here, I will stop for today, and next week or next lecture we will go to the next slide, which is the supply of import of a firm. So this slide also was explained when I was explaining the graph. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry I couldn't have some time for your Q&A. If you have any question, you can write your question in the Microsoft Teams, and I try my best to answer your question. Also, you can consult me for tomorrow consultation hours from 9:30 to 11:30. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to have you in my class. And again, I would like also to remind you that if you are facing any issue or any difficulties with my slang, with my pronunciation, with my voice, please let me know. Do not keep silent. If you're shy, you can text me personally. It's fine. Telling me what is the issue, and I try my best to solve it, rather than you stay like that quiet and you cannot understand. I know it's a difficult time with this internet and so on. Thank you very much. I will see you for those who have, what we say, tutorial class tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow, and for those who have another tutorial class, I will see you on Thursday. Thank you very much.